Newly installed cameras capturing an eruption from the Black Diamond Pool at Yellowstone National Park on Saturday.
Well, Yellowstone is one of the country's most visited national parks.
In the heart of North America, where rugged mountains pierce the sky and rivers carve ancient paths through vast wilderness, lies a place unlike any other on Earth. A land so powerful, so mysterious, that even centuries after its discovery, it continues to captivate the imagination of millions. This is Yellowstone, America's first national park, and perhaps the most extraordinary natural wonder in the world. But before the tourists, before the cameras, before the fame and protection, there was mystery. A land whispered about in stories by native tribes, a place of fire and boiling waters, where the earth itself seemed alive. To early explorers, it was a legend, a myth, a place too wild to be real. Long before maps marked its boundaries, the land of Yellowstone was home to indigenous peoples, the Shoshone, Crow, Bannock, Blackfeet, and others. For thousands of years, they lived among its valleys, hunted on its plains, and told stories of its wonders. To them, the geysers and hot springs were sacred, living spirits of the earth. The ground that hissed and steamed was not something to be conquered, it was something to be respected. When European settlers began to push westward in the 1800s, tales of this strange land began to surface. Trappers and fur traders would return from the wilderness with unbelievable stories. Rivers that boiled, stones that glowed in rainbow colors, and geysers that shot water higher than trees. Most people laughed. They thought these were tall tales, exaggerated by men too long lost in the wild. After all, how could a river boil? How could the ground explode with water and steam? Yet, these stories refused to die. In the early 1800s, a man named John Coulter, a former member of the Lewis and Clark expedition, ventured deep into the Rocky Mountains. After parting ways with the expedition in 1806, he explored regions that no white man had ever seen before. What he witnessed became the stuff of legend. He described steaming vents, bubbling mud, and strange sulfuric smells that filled the air. When he returned and shared his experiences, people mocked him. They called it Coulter's Hell. But Coulter had indeed glimpsed a small corner of what we now know as Yellowstone. He was the first outsider to witness its raw geothermal power. Yet for nearly 70 more years, the rest of the world dismissed these stories as fantasy. By the 1850s and 1860s, America was changing. Railroads were stretching westward. Settlers were moving into new territories, and the nation's hunger for exploration was at its peak. Curiosity grew about the Wonderland, whispered of by trappers and hunters. The idea that such a place could exist, full of geysers, waterfalls, and vast untouched wilderness, was irresistible to scientists, adventurers, and dreamers alike. In 1869, a small group of explorers led by David Folsom and Charles Cook ventured into the unknown. They became the first organized expedition to explore parts of the Yellowstone region. What they saw was beyond imagination: endless valleys filled with bison and elk, steaming pools that reflected the sky like mirrors, and mountains painted with colors no artist could capture. When they returned, their descriptions reignited interest in the region. But still, the wider public remained skeptical. It wasn't until 1870 that Yellowstone's mysteries would finally be unveiled to the world. A man named Henry Washburn, along with a group of 19 men including Nathaniel Langford and a photographer named William Henry Jackson, organized the now famous Washburn-Langford Dome expedition. Their goal was simple but ambitious: to document the truth about the land of fire and brimstone. They journeyed through dangerous terrain, crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and camped near roaring geysers that erupted in the night. They measured the hot springs, mapped the valleys, and named many of Yellowstone's most iconic features, including Old Faithful, the geyser that would become a symbol of the park itself. For the first time, there was proof. This land was not a myth. It was real, and it was magnificent. When the expedition returned, they brought with them sketches, notes, and first-hand accounts that astonished the scientific community and captured the public's imagination. But it was another expedition, just 2 years later, that would change everything. In 1871, the U.S. Geological Survey sent an official team led by geologist Ferdinand Vanderveer Hayden. This was the first federally funded scientific expedition to Yellowstone. Accompanying Hayden were artists, photographers, and naturalists, including the legendary photographer William Henry Jackson and painter Thomas Moran. Together, they created images that would forever change how Americans saw their own land. Jackson's photographs, the first ever taken of Yellowstone, and Moran's breathtaking paintings were unlike anything the public had seen. Waterfalls that cascaded into mist, geysers erupting like the heartbeat of the earth, and landscapes painted in surreal colors, blues, yellows, reds, and greens. These visuals gave life to what words alone could not describe. When Hayden presented his findings and these images to Congress, something remarkable happened. Lawmakers were moved, not just by the beauty, but by the realization that this land was something special, something worth protecting. And so, on March 1, 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant signed the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act, creating the world's first national park. It was a revolutionary idea that a vast piece of land should belong not to the wealthy, not to private owners, but to everyone, to be preserved for the people for all time. Yellowstone became not just America's first national park, but the model for conservation efforts around the world. But while the birth of Yellowstone as a park was a triumph, its story was far from over. The land itself, ancient, volatile, alive, still held secrets that few could comprehend. The early years of the park were filled with challenges: poaching, mismanagement, and the struggle to balance preservation with human curiosity. Yet through all of it, Yellowstone remained wild, powerful, and eternal.